Moments after lifting off from Louisville, a fully loaded UPS MD-11 freighter burst into flames, carving a half-mile scar of destruction through warehouses and scrapyards. Within minutes, NTSB investigators were on scene. And tonight, newly released briefing footage confirms what pilots feared most. The aircraft lost an entire engine mid-takeoff. So, how does a modern wide-body jet built to survive even a single engine failure tear itself apart on departure? And what exactly does that first NTSB briefing, along with the physical wreckage, reveal about what really happened on runway 17? Let's check it. Let's start with what we know for sure, the timeline that no one disputes. UPS Flight 2976 was operating a McDonnell Douglas MD-11 freighter, tail number November 259, uniform Papa. The jet rolled out of the factory in 1991, was converted for cargo in 2006, and has spent most of its life flying heavy freight across oceans and continents. On the night of the 4th of November 2025, it was headed from Louisville, Kentucky to Honolulu, Hawaii, a long-haul route that demands everything the aircraft has to give. There were 3 crew members on board, a captain and 2 first officers. The standard augmented setup for overnight flights where rest breaks are required. No loadmaster was carried. UPS phased those out years ago. At takeoff, the aircraft was close to maximum gross weight, around 630,000 pounds, with about 280,000 pounds of Jet A1 fuel. That's roughly 75 tons of fuel sitting in the wings and center tanks. The weather was clear, dusk light fading over the airfield, and the MD-11 lined up on runway 17 right at about 5:15 p.m. local time. According to ADSB tracking data, the jet accelerated to roughly 184 knots, that's about 210 miles per hour, and from brake release to the moment it stopped moving on the ground was barely 66 seconds. Within that single minute, everything that could go wrong did. The plane barely cleared the 12-foot airport fence, then rolled violently left and slammed into industrial buildings just off the runway's end. What followed was a wall of fire that consumed a half-mile stretch of warehouses and scrapyards. By the time first responders reached the site, 9 fatalities were confirmed, including all 3 crew members and several people on the ground. It's a horrifying sequence, but it didn't come out of nowhere. The early evidence, now supported by official briefings, paints a picture of mechanical failure that unfolded literally in seconds. When the NTSB released portions of its initial press briefing, it included key statements confirming what aviation observers had already suspected. Member Tom Chapman told reporters that airport CCTV clearly showed a bright plume of fire beneath the left wing before liftoff, followed almost immediately by the engine, number 1, separating from the airplane. Investigators have since located that engine on the airfield itself, a fact that removes any doubt it came off before the aircraft left airport property. Dashcam videos taken from nearby industrial roads support that timeline. You can see the jet lifting steeply, its nose high, trailing a column of fire along the left wing route. Then, in less than 3 seconds, the light disappears behind the horizon, followed by the unmistakable flash of the impact fireball. There's no glide, no prolonged struggle in the air. The entire airborne portion lasted only a heartbeat. Other ground photos match the ADSB track exactly, showing the crash path slicing through Grade A auto parts and Kentucky Petroleum Recycling, both located directly beyond runway 17 right. The consistency between the footage and flight data gives investigators high confidence in the sequence. What's important here isn't just what we see, it's what those visuals imply. The continuous flame from the moment of rotation tells us the fire wasn't a random spark after impact. It was fuel-fed, almost certainly from lines or tanks ruptured when the engine mount failed. And the fact that the entire engine detached, not simply caught fire, points toward a structural or mechanical failure inside the pylon assembly rather than a basic engine fire. In other words, this wasn't just a flameout. The airplane was literally losing a third of its power and a major chunk of its structure at the same time. That distinction matters because modern airliners, including the MD-11, are built to fly safely with one engine out. They are not designed to lose an engine and a piece of the wing that carries fuel and hydraulics in the middle of the takeoff roll. That's a different level of catastrophe. The newly released NTSB footage also showed investigators walking the debris-strewn runway, pointing out the engine core and torn cowling panels lying near the departure end of 17 right. These aren't scattered far from the pavement, they're within airport fences, confirming that the failure happened on the runway itself, not after the airplane climbed away. You can also spot the shattered PAPI lights, those precision approach indicators sitting near the edge of the runway. They're bent and scorched, likely struck by fragments from the departing engine. Those lights sit a few thousand feet short of the runway's end, which gives us a rough idea where the breakup began. It's right around the point pilots call V1, the decision speed. For those who aren't pilots, V1 is the last split second where the crew can safely reject a takeoff. Past that, you're committed, there's not enough runway left to stop. That timing makes this scenario even crueler. The marks on the pavement show the jet kept rolling straight after the failure, meaning the crew maintained directional control despite the explosion and asymmetric thrust. But once the engine tore free, there was no real chance of an abort. They were already beyond the point of no return. The NTSB's FOD walk plan, that's foreign object debris mapping, will now use drones and laser grids to tag every small piece on the runway. Bolts, mount lugs, hydraulic lines, even fuel coupling fragments. By studying how those fragments spread, engineers can determine the exact moment and location the structure failed. From what's visible so far, the breakup seems to have occurred right at rotation, the instant when aerodynamic load on the wings suddenly spikes. Losing an engine mount under that stress doesn't just remove thrust, it rips open fuel and hydraulic systems that run through the same wing route. That's why the fire grew so violently, and why the MD-11 lost control in seconds. So when we combine the timeline, the video, and the wreckage pattern, it becomes brutally clear. A structural failure on the left side occurred precisely at the most vulnerable second of flight, leaving the crew with zero tools to save the airplane. Once the engine came apart, the rest unfolded in brutal mechanical logic. Every system on the MD-11's left wing depends on that structure staying intact, hydraulic lines, fuel feed, and the actuators that move the slats and ailerons. When one engine either exploded internally or tore loose from its pylon, shrapnel would have sliced straight through that maze of lines. In a heartbeat, you get a pressurized fuel, fire, and a sudden drop in hydraulic pressure. That's not a fire indication, that's a torch under the wing, fed by its own plumbing. Investigators and MD-11 pilots following the footage have pointed out one other clue. A brief puff near the tail, likely a compressor stall in the center engine. The number 2. If hot debris or a pressure pulse reached that intake, it could have momentarily choked the fan, stealing even more thrust when the aircraft could least afford it. So you go from 3 engines to, effectively, 1.5. And that's the deadly combination thrust asymmetry plus hydraulic loss. The left wing would start losing lift as its slats retracted under aerodynamic load, while the right wing kept flying normally. The result is a violent roll that no human could counter at 100 feet. The MD-11 is technically certified to climb on 2 engines, but that's assuming everything else works. At rotation, there's no altitude, no airspeed buffer, and no time. Losing both thrust and control authority together means the airplane is no longer controllable. It's just physics. One longtime MD-11 captain watching the NTSB briefing called it a no-win scenario. He put it bluntly, you can train for one engine out, you can't train for the airplane disassembling itself on takeoff. The fire that followed was almost inevitable once 75 tons of Jet A-1 hit the ground. That much fuel doesn't burn, it erupts. Weather radar images taken minutes afterward actually painted the smoke plume as if it were a rainstorm. The half-mile stretch of impact tore through steel frame buildings, scrap piles, and tanker trucks, turning the area into a temporary furnace. Cars in the nearby yard were reduced to skeletal metal. Multiple fire departments converged within minutes, but the scale was overwhelming. Crews from across Jefferson County and UPS's own airport response units fought to contain the blaze before it reached the residential blocks just east of the industrial zone. They succeeded, but only after working well into the night. By midnight, the main fires were knocked down, an incredible effort that, according to investigators, preserved the black boxes before the flames could cook through their casings. The human toll was heavy. All 3 pilots were lost instantly. On the ground, early reports listed half a dozen people injured. Within a day, that count rose to 9 confirmed fatalities. Louisville's emergency services called it one of the worst industrial area disasters they've ever faced. Even in tragedy, there's a strange irony. The same swift response that couldn't save the airplane ended up saving the evidence that may prevent the next one. By dawn on November 5, the NTSB GO team had boots on the ground, about 28 specialists led by investigator-in-charge Chi-Hoon Shin. Their first mission was organization. They divided into focus groups. Operations, to examine crew schedules, rest, and decision-making. Structures, to map the wreckage and calculate impact angles. Power plants, to dissect the engines and pylon hardware. Systems, to trace hydraulic, electrical, and flight control components. Maintenance, to audit the airplane's service records. And human performance, to reconstruct what the pilots might have seen, heard, and tried to do. Late that same day, they recovered both flight recorders, L3 Harris CVR and FDR units, heat-scorched but intact. Those are now en route to the NTSB's Washington lab, where engineers will decode the data, switch positions, engine parameters, control inputs, and cockpit audio. It's painstaking work, but it's the only way to map the final 60 seconds, second by second. UPS has released a statement mourning the crew and pledging full cooperation. Under the 1996 Family Assistance Act, company and federal staff are now helping the families directly, a small measure of stability in the middle of chaos. As for the technical side, expect the preliminary report within 2 to 4 weeks. The final cause may take a year. Investigators will focus on 3 big unknowns. Did the September-October maintenance period involve the engine number 1 or pylon structure? Was there metal fatigue or corrosion that escaped inspection? Did foreign object debris on the runway trigger the failure instead? And maybe the hardest question, why the MD-11 safeguards couldn't contain the chain reaction once that engine failed. At the end of the NTSB briefing, Member Chapman quoted a phrase engraved at the agency's training center. "From tragedy, we draw knowledge." It's a sober reminder that every broken bolt and burnt wire on that runway is now a data point to keep the next crew, the next flight, from suffering the same fate. That's the mission now, not blame, not speculation, just finding truth in the wreckage of UPS 2976. If you want to stay updated as the NTSB releases new findings, make sure to subscribe and stick around because this story is far from over.